Kitchen islands remain as one of the most wished for elements of any new kitchen, and I completely understand why. But a poorly planned island can cause just as many problems as a well-planned one solves. So in this video, I want to walk you through everything you need to think about when designing a kitchen island. Does your space actually work for an island? Before we get into any of the details, this is the question worth starting with, because one of the biggest mistakes I see with kitchen islands isn't a design detail, it's an island that's simply too big for the room it's sitting in. Now, there's no hard rule, as kitchen islands can be any size you like really, but if we class the bare minimum to be an island that's 1 meter by 60 centimeters, and our kitchen layout is as simple as it can be with just one run and then the island in front of it, you're looking at a room size of 3.2 meters by 3 meters. And honestly, that's still not exactly a good use of the space or a particularly helpfully sized island. My point is, from the very off, your room needs to be a certain size and shape to have any chance at making this type of kitchen layout work. And the way you assess that comes down to one thing above everything else: the walkway space around it. Walkway sizes. The happy starting point I generally recommend for a comfortable, functional walkway is 1 meter. 1 meter between the edge of the island and the adjacent run of cabinets or wall. For busier walkways, the ones where 2 people are regularly working or moving through the space at the same time, I'd aim for 1.2 meters if you can. Same goes for walkways in front of a fridge or larder cabinet that gets used often. You want that fridge door to swing open without immediately hitting whoever's standing at the island, so 1.2 meters gives you that breathing room. And if your island has seating on one side, 1.2 meters behind the stools as well, so people can push back and stand up without immediately walking into something. Now, there's also one exception worth knowing about. If one of the ends of your islands sits across from a wall or something like patio doors that don't involve any opening cabinet doors or regular foot traffic, you can comfortably go down to 90 centimeters at that end. In some cases, even 80 centimeters is workable, particularly if it's more of a closed end that nobody really needs to move through. So the practical exercise here is to take your room dimensions, mark out where your main cabinet runs are going to be, then plot some guidelines 1 to 1.2 meters parallel to these to give you your kitchen island zone. And I'm not saying the island has to be this exact size, but it gives you a good sense of what you can realistically fit in your room and what you've then got to work with. What is your island actually for? People often come to the island conversation knowing they want one, but without having really thought through what they want it to do. But the answer to that question can really impact how the island, and the rest of the kitchen for that matter, are designed. An island is typically one of 3 types, and sometimes it's a mix of these. The cooking island. Having your hob or cooktop on the island is a choice I'd say is growing in popularity as newer appliances and forms of extraction have become available. And when it's done well, it can be lovely. You're cooking facing into the room, facing your guests, part of whatever's going on, rather than standing with your back to everyone. It creates a really social cooking experience. But there are a few things to think through carefully if this is the route you're going down. First, extraction. If the hob is on the island, the extractor has to come down from the ceiling above it, be in the ceiling above it, or be some form of downdraft extraction at the hob itself. There's no wall to simply run the ducting out through, so you need to plan the extraction route early. Second is prep space. You still need worktop space either side of your hob. Don't let the hob take up so much of the island that you've got nowhere to land things or do any prep around it. So in our earlier example of that bare minimum island, 1 meter wide, putting a 5 burner hob on it will pretty much eat up the whole space. not ideal. And third is seating. If you want seating on the island as well as a hob, think carefully about where the seating goes. Directly behind the hob means whoever's sitting there is right in the splash zone. Having a deeper island becomes more important here to help create that distance from the back of the hob. Moving the seating to one end of the island or going for an L-shaped seating configuration positioned away from the back of the hob can all mitigate this issue as well. The sink island. Putting the sink on the island turns it into a cleaning and a bit of a prep hub, and it can work brilliantly, particularly in larger kitchens where having the sink in the perimeter run would mean a lot of back and forth. If the sink is on the island, keep the dishwasher nearby, ideally in the island itself or as close as possible. Same with the bin, the whole cleanup zone should be clustered together. And again, think about seating placement. Seating directly behind the sink means whoever's sitting there is close to that splash zone again, so think about your distances. The other thing to plan carefully here is the plumbing route. Getting water supply and waste to an island requires some thought at the planning stage. You're going to be digging up that floor. The prep and social island. And then there's the option of nothing at all. No hob, no sink, just worktop, storage, and pretty often seating. A clear island tends to become your main prep space and your social hub all in one. And it can be a bit more flexible. It keeps the island surface completely clear and available for whatever you need it for food prep, homework, breakfast, putting down shopping bags, rolling out pastry, or just having a coffee at while you chat to whoever's in the room. Without the constraints of a hob or a sink, the layout options are wider. The island can often be a bit more compact, and you don't have to think about extraction routes or plumbing. It sounds great, but it's not always the right choice. Depending on the size and layout of the rest of your kitchen, you may not have the luxury of keeping it completely clear, or you simply may not want to. Seating. If you want seating at your island, and most people do, there are a few things to get right that are easy to overlook in the planning stage. Firstly, how many seats? Now, the size of your island will obviously impact this to some extent. But if you have a good-sized island that could, in theory, comfortably sit 4 people, but you only ever need it to sit 2 or 3, well, then that frees up some more design and cabinet layout options for the island. A comfortable allowance per person is around 60 centimeters. That gives everyone enough elbow room to sit comfortably without feeling cramped. 50 centimeters per person is workable, a little bit less generous, but fine if space is tight. And then there's the overhang depth. For the worktop overhang where the stools tuck underneath, 30 centimeters is usually the sweet spot. It's the most common overhang depth, it gives good knee clearance, and it's typically the largest unsupported overhang you can achieve with a standard 30mm thick stone worktop. Having thinner worktops will mean smaller unsupported overhangs. And if you want more than 30 centimeters, you'll usually need some form of support underneath. Brackets, corbels, or legs. So this is all worth discussing with your worktop fabricator before you finalize the design. You should also consider your seating configuration. Usually people want to maximize the number of seats, and so they end up in a row along the back. But if you only need 1 or 2 seats and want to maximize storage, then putting them along the shorter end of the island can work well. One configuration I really like is L-shaped seating. What I love about it is that it's genuinely more social. People are at slight angles to each other rather than all facing the same direction, which makes conversation easier and the whole thing feel like a table and less like a bar. And if you're trying to fit more seats in, it can also be a more space-efficient way to do it, so it's worth considering if your island layout allows for it. Worktop slab size. This is one that catches people out and is worth knowing about early before you fall in love with a particular stone. Most natural and engineered stone come in slabs approximately 3 meters by 1.4 meters. Some manufacturers offer jumbo slabs up to about 3.2 meters by 1.6, but not every color or finish is available at that size. So that's your maximum worktop size before you'll need a joint in it. If your island is longer than 3 meters, you'll need 2 slabs, which means a visible join somewhere. And joins in stone worktops can be quite noticeable. Sometimes they can be done neatly, but they're always still there. So if this applies to your island, it's worth thinking about early so it doesn't come as a surprise when you're at the templating stage. A few options: if you do need to have a joint, you could introduce a different material at the joint, a strip of timber or a contrasting stone, turning what could feel like a compromise into more of a deliberate design feature. You could even use the Kintsugi principle I've talked about before, embracing the joint as part of the design, making it a highlight rather than something to hide. Or, simplest of all, keep the island under 3 meters if a seamless worktop really matters to you. Island ends and finishes. The ends of your island are a really nice opportunity to add some visual interest and personality to the design. And there are more options here than most people realize. Plain end panels, a simple clean end panel in the same finish as the rest of the island. Timeless, unfussy, always works, and actually provides a really lovely contrast opportunity against the worktop above. Fluted or ribbed panels. Fluted end panels have become really popular in recent years, and when used selectively, they can look great. Just don't go overboard on the fluting everywhere else. Decorative panels. More traditional kitchens might use molded or decorative paneling on the island ends, corbels, beading, or raised details that echo the cabinetry style elsewhere. The floating island look. This is where the end panels don't go all the way down to the floor. So you end up with the plinth or toe kick exposed more, and this look of it wrapping around the whole island at the bottom. So the cabinets above look like they're floating, sort of. And then there's waterfall ends, where the worktop material continues down the end of the island to the floor, creating a continuous flowing surface. It can look stunning, and it's a great way to highlight a beautiful worktop material. Just make sure it's an intentional choice rather than a default one, because it uses significantly more material, which adds to the cost, and it doesn't necessarily suit every kitchen island design. Power on the island. In my humble opinion, you need power on your island. Plugging in a hand blender, charging a phone, or using your food processor, all of these things happen at an island, and if there's no power, you end up with trailing cables across worktops and walkways. So if you're ripping up the floor anyway, get some cables in there early so you're not caught out later. There's various options when it comes to your sockets. Pop-up sockets. These sit almost flush on the worktop when not in use, and then pop up when you need them. They're probably the default choice for a lot of kitchens. Flip sockets, similar concept, slightly different mechanism. Again, a neat and popular option. You can now get versions of these that use the same worktop material as their top and sit completely flush, so they blend in much better. Sockets in the end panel, really tidy solution where the socket sits in the side face of the island, out of sight from most angles, but accessible when you need it. Or there's under the overhang, tucked underneath at the back of the island, usually if it's an end panel and not cabinet storage in that area. Now, before you finalize which method you're going with, check the current building regulations in your area. Some socket types and installation methods have specific rules around them, and what was once a common solution a few years ago may now have restrictions in certain regions. Your designer or electrician will be able to advise, but flag it early in the process rather than assuming any particular solution is fine. Lighting above the island. The island is a working surface. It's where you're potentially prepping food, reading recipes, and spending a lot of time during the day. So you need proper task lighting above it. Pendants above an island are probably the most popular choice, and for good reason. They look beautiful, they add a lot of warmth and atmosphere, and they're available in such a wide range of styles that there's something to suit almost any kitchen. If you're going for pendants, just think about the heights that they hang at. You want them low enough to be effective as task lighting and to have visual impact, but not so low that they're in the way or at eye level when you're standing at the island. A general guide is around 70 to 90 centimeters above the worktop surface, but it can vary depending on the pendant style, the ceiling height, and your height. And if you're having multiple pendants, space them evenly and make sure they're centered on the island below, not just centered in the room. Or a clean, contemporary alternative is a row of ceiling spots or a track light positioned directly above the island. Less visual drama than pendants, but very effective as task lighting, and it keeps the ceiling feeling clean and uncluttered. And if you have a cooker hood above the island, most good extractor hoods include integrated lighting in the unit itself, and this can actually provide excellent task lighting directly over the cooking area. If your hood has good integrated lighting, you may not need additional ceiling lighting over that part of the island. But if your island is significantly larger than the cooking hood area, you might still want additional lighting, especially if those areas are used for prep work. A few more things worth thinking about. The actual storage inside the island. This sounds obvious, but it's worth thinking about specifically, not just in terms of the type of island, hob or sink on it, and what appliances and supporting elements you need for those, but also how much storage you need elsewhere on the island and what type of storage that is. Deep drawers for pots and pans, slim pullouts for spices and oils, a wine fridge, some bins, a microwave drawer. How you build the island out within its set confines needs to support the overall kitchen flow and functionality. There's also the shape of the island itself. Most islands are rectangular, but they don't have to be. An L-shaped or T-shaped island where one end extends slightly to create an additional return can be a really effective way to add more seating without making the island longer. Or a small step in the worktop height on the seating side, so the worktop drops down slightly to a more comfortable dining height, maybe even a built-in banquette seating section on the back. While not for everyone, looking at these alternative shapes and functions could be that perfect solution for your room. Even things down to the color or finish of your island. The island is one of the best places in the kitchen to try something a little bit more interesting. If your perimeter cabinets are more neutral, a darker or more characterful island color tends to look considered rather than risky. It's far easier to commit to a stronger color on an island than across the entire kitchen. A kitchen island is one of those elements that can really elevate a kitchen when it's designed properly. But the key word there is properly. It needs to fit the room, it needs to serve a clear purpose, and it needs to be planned with all the details thought through. So, are you planning a kitchen island as part of your design, or do you already have one, and is there something you'd wish you'd done differently? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, where I cover everything you need to know about having a hob on a kitchen island, the pros, the cons, and all the practical advice. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.